everybody, and welcome to another of DCT Recruitment's The Icing on the Career Cake. And where is there better to ice a cake, bake it, and make it beautiful than in a kitchen? And today, Maria is joining us from James Kitchens. Hello, Maria. How are you?
Hi, Graham. I'm great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Cool. Kitchens, hey? My kitchen is getting there. It's not there yet. When I first bought it, it was a complete state. Just little curtains, a worked surface that was sticky to the touch, disgusting, because it had been made out of pallet wood. You must have seen all manner of kitchens over the years.
Just a few. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are some that you just sort of think, I really don't even want to be in there. But what you find is some people change with a kitchen, other people don't. So no matter how wonderful a new kitchen is, you can't change old habits. But in the main, we don't get very many of those. But yeah, we've seen some states. It's, yeah, true, has to be said, yeah.
Is that the joy of the job though, Maria, seeing the before and after, like seeing the transformation? Yeah,
it is. But I tell you, one of the best things about going through the journey, and I'm not always at the start of the journey. Sometimes there might be, sometimes I will take the inquiry when it comes in. Other times it will be that I will see them through like the presentation process when they're in with the designer. So one of the best things is seeing the customer realize their own dream, because I always sort of say that we are more the conduit to their dreams rather than we are the dream maker. We are the creators of their dreams. And I know that seems a bit cliche, but it's absolutely true. And a lot of the time customers sort of say, I'm overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. Oh my God, it's such a, you know, what if I get it wrong? And we sort of say, you do know what you want. They want reassurance that they're making the right decisions. And I think that is where studios like ourselves really come into their own, in the fact that it's not a conveyor belt. We're not trying to get you through the process really quick. So the joyous bit for us is seeing the customer's own ideas come to reality and then put their personal stamp on it.
Yeah.
Graham, you're on mute.
Absolutely. And it must be one of the most, I think it's one of the most joyful things about any business is actually getting to know people and be able to go on that sort of personal journey with people as well. But to be able to kind of then manifest that in something that actually will change their lives and give them, back part of their home that may be not working for them at the moment. That's tremendous. I used to do a similar thing with offices, because at one point I used to design people's office spaces, and that again, you have that whole journey with them where they say, oh, it just doesn't work for me at the moment. I can't be productive in here because of this. You must have that kind of feel with them as well, as they tell you that I've now been able to do this. Yeah,
I think it's great. The lady came in, I think, last week, and I said to her, the best way to start is list all the things that you really love about your kitchen and everything you hate. I hate it. I hate everything about my kitchen. And okay, so you got some strong views about how you feel. She went, yeah, there's nothing I like, absolutely nothing. And I was like, oh, you could tell that she really hated being in that space. And it was like, okay, because sometimes we get really strong reactions like that, which is interesting.
I've got to ask this question. Right? And we will get on to in a minute, how you got into the business and whatever else. But is that generally like one member of a husband and wife team or a partnership or whatever that's like more strongly attached to the kitchen than the other, or do you?
No, do you know what? Usually when they've come in, it's because they've already made their mind up. They're changing their kitchen. Right. So in reality, they won't come in as a couple unless they're ready. So what we might get is the wife, girlfriend, or the husband, boyfriend come in first, just to make an initial inquiry. And then we might only see one of them also at survey. But when they're coming to have their presentation, that's when they're both in. That's when they're both on the same page.
That's good.
Do you not think that's the best blank canvas though, when they hate it all and you can just make it completely different and workable for them. And then that's
because all
when
they can see,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely, because all they can see is how horrible their kitchen is. So anything at that point is going to be a bonus to them, in fairness. But with people like that, they tend to have really strong views, which is great. I love that.
Now, tell us how you got into kitchens.
Well, I'm not
literally opened the door and walked in, obviously, but you know, how did you get into this business?
Well, it's interesting, Graham, because I'm not from a kitchen background. So over 6 years ago, probably 7 years ago, when it all started, really, was my partner was approached by the previous ownership to say that they wanted to sell, and would he be interested in selling, because he already had a kitchen company himself. And they had probably been, the actual company itself had probably been going around about the same time. My partner's business had been going a lot longer, only by a little bit. So I think they knew, obviously, that they were a good brand, and that they wanted to see if another really good brand wanted to then buy it. He wasn't really in the market. He already had 2 showrooms. He didn't really want to expand any further. But he knew that I wanted more than the job I was doing, because I'd had previous businesses and I'd come away from that wanting to not have responsibility, but then suddenly realizing that actually what I hanker after is to have something of my own. And it's very hard, isn't it? You go back to being employed when you've been the boss, and it's really difficult. So he actually approached me and said, I think this would be really good for you. I said, but I know nothing about kitchens. And he said, you don't need to, you know how to run a business. He said, I can be here as your support. He said, but essentially I think you could do it. And I went, okay. And my belief was back then, and it always will be, is if you've got the right people in the business, then your business will thrive.
The right people being?
The right people being all the obvious things, which is they've got to be passionate, driven. Obviously, they need a creative edge. But in reality, they need to align with the customer journey and the business journey. And when I say that, it's not just process driven. It means that it's important the customer's heard, very, very important. And not a lot of people can sit back and listen. And essentially what customers initially want to do is go, blah, with all their information. And it's not about you saying what you think they should have. It's about listening to how they live, how they want to live if they're not living like that now, and what they essentially want this space to do for them, and for it to really do. These days it's multi-purpose. And if you don't listen and you get that slightly wrong, when you come to the design phase on the first impressions, which is always harsh, because first impressions is what they always remember. If you don't quite hit the mark with it, then that's it, they're turned off. So they can have all the sales skills in the world, they can have all of the design skills in the world, but if you can't gain rapport and you don't know how to listen, you've lost your client before you even begin.
Yeah. That's completely the same as us, that, Maria. What our USP is you can get the right skill sets. Like, anyone can probably design a basic kitchen, but putting that extra ingredients in of the little intricate details that the person wants, that's the same for us in looking at the culture and the values a person has. Do they align with that business that we're going to put them in together? And that's where the magic happens then, isn't it? So yeah, I couldn't agree more that you've got to listen to what people want. You've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Exactly that. Sure.
I want to know, you're on a seaside front, yes? Yeah. Right, okay. So, well, there's a couple of questions here. One is, has anyone ever come into you thinking that, because they see like a kitchen worktop or whatever, that you're going to sell them fish and chips? Or like, and secondly, right, years ago, I actually did some work with Wix, right, who obviously sell kitchens. And I actually helped redesign their design centres across the country to make them work better for them. And they had a belief, and I don't know whether this follows through at all, but they had a belief that if you got someone interested in a tap, you could sell them a kitchen. In other words, sometimes people would come in to buy an upgrade to a tap or whatever, and that would then start a conversation, and then it would be like, yeah, but where's the tap going? And then, how's that going to work with your current sink area? Does your sink area work? no, it doesn't, etc. So the conversation can grow from an accessory. Is there an element of that?
There is certainly an element of that. You know, we often get people on door changes, which aren't as straightforward, but I won't go into that. Yes, they can. A lot of people come in to see the cooker tap because it's a hot water tap. So it's people want to come and see it. And then they realise how much space it takes. And then there's a reconfiguration element to it. So yeah, there is. At the moment, the biggest thing seems to be splashbacks. So we've got a really sort of like quite striking one in the showroom that you can see from the outside, and people are coming going, oh, where's that from? How'd you get that? How do I have one? That's interesting, because then they look and they said, yeah, but if we do that, it's going to make the kitchen look really dated, isn't it? Because, you know, and I go, well, not necessarily, but, you know, if you'd like to go quite, you know, then obviously we can do that for you. That's in a nutshell. But yeah, I think so. We've never been confused with a fish and chip shop. However, we do have a building society next door, and quite frequently we have some clients come in and say, I'd like to pay something in, and we'd love to take your money, but sadly we're not a building society. That's next door. And it amazes me because we're completely different. The frontage is completely different, and they've got a massive sign outside, as we have. So it's quite funny.
Well, but then again, with the number of sort of, you know, banks and whatever on the high street disappearing, there could be call for that in the future. You never know.
You never know. You never know.
You could become a dual front. You know, you could. Yeah.
You never know, Graham. You never know.
Maybe you just offer like a building society or a bank part of your you know.
The James Banking Hub. Is that what you mean?
Well,
I mean, exactly. It's got a ring to it, hasn't it?
It certainly has. What's been the most difficult thing about running this business?
People.
All right, so they're the best thing, but the worst thing.
Yeah, and I think on both sides, so employees and also your clients. And this goes back to that whole listening element again. I think if you have a bad apple in your staffing, it actually can consume you. And getting that right, and sometimes you don't always know, and sometimes people change as well. They can be one person and then they change. So in that sort of scenario, it gets quite difficult. Fortunately, I don't have that at the moment, which is great. So, and I think with clients, sometimes clients feel they want to own your soul. So they believe that because they are taking a service from you, that they can dictate how your process and procedures go. So we've had people probably comment on our terms and conditions where you need to change them. And it's like, well, I don't get to change those, I'm afraid. Or people sort of saying, well, you know, because we have 3 brand suppliers here. Well, I don't like any of these. Can you not just get something else? And it's like, no, not really. No, we can't do that. And then also people sort of saying that they, again, you know, they want to dictate how everything goes throughout the whole process. And it's like, well, no, you've come to us because we know what we're doing and we do it right. You know, I wouldn't come along to your business and tell you how to do it. We don't say that, obviously. So customers can be challenging, you know, as in how their demands are. And then you get some absolutely amazing clients who just love everything you do and totally get who you are. But I guess that's just business. You're going to get that in every business. I'm sure Diane, well, I know for sure Diane does, and I know you do as well, Graham. So it's how you deal with it and how you get over it, you know.
Yeah, people are the one thing no one ever in life is going to be able to control, because, you know, you can give as much information, you can do whatever you want, but you might not always get the outcome either person wants, and that's just life, isn't it? You know what I mean? So yeah, it can be wonderful when it works, but it can be soul destroying when it doesn't.
there is that, especially as I think some people, they lie, and we work on so much transparency right from the moment anyone comes through the door. We try and gain the rapport first of all, but also ensure that they understand, you know, this is our procedure, and and then, because you don't want to have them come in, go part way through your process and think, well, you didn't tell me that, did you? And it's like, and immediately you've lost them, you know. So even from our inquiry booklets that we've got to our lead sheets, to every bit of information we've got, we try and make it as clear as possible, you know, from website through to end result. At all times that we're communicating, we're giving them additional information to say, this is what will happen next. You know, realities of a remodel, this is what you're likely to experience. So we try and, you know, mitigate that, you know, to some degree, but you're never going to get it right every time.
No, you do learn as you go along, though, don't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When you're doing a project, Maria, and people change things, and then it gets to the final bill, so they forget they've added things and it's changes, that are they quite difficult conversations because they don't realise the cost implications sometimes.
Do you know what? In all fairness, we make it really clear so that we offer, obviously, to be able to do a survey, first of all, to do all the measure, take a full wish list down. And then the next process is for them to come in for a presentation. Now, they can get 2 presentations. That's all for free. And those presentations, they can't take any designs or plans away or anything like that. We don't send anything, but they get a quotation, obviously. So what we sort of say to them is, and even on our inquiry form, when we're taking the inquiry, we give them a copy of it because we ask them to sign it for GDPR purposes. But on the bottom, it shows a very mini version of our process and procedure. So 1 is, this is what you'll get. 2 is, if you want to go ahead, it's a 25% deposit. The 3rd one is, if you do proceed and you carry on, we will expect payment 2 weeks prior to the kitchen being delivered. And they're the big things. They're the big things that people want to know sort of straight off the bat. So if they don't want to continue at that point, then it's an easy one. We're not going to proceed with you, you know, and that's fine. That means they're not our client because they're going to be pushing that boundary already on those points. So going forward from there, when we go through that entire process, we're hoping that we've answered all the questions as we go. And then before we even order the product, we do a pre-fit survey with the installers. So what that means is that we go out there. So before we order any goods, if there is any changes, in other words, if there's build works, because as you know, Diane, you know, things can change massively. So we won't do a final survey until the plaster's up if it's a newer renovation. And if they change things, in other words, they want to change things around, they can, because we haven't put it to the factory. And it's at that point, because we say during the process, everything's subject to survey. If any changes appear at that pre-fit survey, then that could have an impact on your end price. So we do already say that. And it's only at that point it usually gets changed, in all fairness. So when it comes to that point, the customer's fully aware, because we also put that in writing to them, that if there are any changes, like we've had it just recently, having that conversation isn't that bad. But when we do put the order through, we do sort of say to the client, it's at this point you can make no further changes, because once we put it to the factory, we can't take it back. And so we generally, as a rule, it's not finite by any means, because people do still try and change it. But if they do, we have to do a separate contract for it.
Yeah. It's very similar in a way to office furniture that I was in for years, and you know, similar sort of thing. But you end up, over the years, you end up having to refine your processes because you get your fingers burnt a little bit, and then you think, oh no, next time I'm gonna make sure that this isn't there. You know, I mean, we had to give people plans, but you would sell them the plans so that, you know, therefore at least you covered the cost of developing those plans and putting the effort into those plans and whatever, if they did then decide to take it elsewhere, because
for sure. And we would do exactly the same, to be really honest, Graham. We would, if somebody said they just wanted the design service, we would happily charge for that and say, there you go, have as many plans and perspectives as you like, you know, and thank you very much for choosing us for your design service. But invariably people want the hand holding. And it's important to say, at one point people thought we were project managers, and we had a little bit of a fight on our hands in the early days because I'd taken over something that was already in place. And as you know, to make something your own takes a little bit of time. And so one of the things we made sure that we do now is we explain in our inquiry booklet that we don't offer a project management service, but if you do wish to have that, these are some things to consider when engaging someone. So we'll coordinate everything, but to project manage, really, the definition of project management is to have somebody on site every day, you know, to oversee it. We don't have the manpower for that.
No. When you were talking earlier about fussy people, it's sprung to mind. There's a sort of Instagram or whatever going viral at the moment. It's a clip from Say Yes to the Dress, and awkwardly the bride, you've seen it, the bride comes back in and she's bigger than she was before, but she won't have any of that. She's definitely not put on weight. But how you deal with those situations, you know, but in a similar vein, you know, when you've got measurements for a kitchen or whatever, you will give them the measurements, you will get it all signed off. You would say, you know, have you checked all of this, etc. And, you know, I had it in the past where, like, you'd show people the plans, you'd show them where everything fits, and you go, oh, and you've chosen 1,600 desks, and then when everything arrives, they go, no, I wanted 1,400. You go, well, you've ordered this. Oh no, I want this. Well, that's fine, but you'll have to keep these and sell these or do something with these, because you know it's
it does get difficult. I agree, because there's so many conversations a lot of the time, and usually the presentations will exceed even the 2 visits, because they might have done an absolute U-turn on what they originally wanted, you know, which requires, I mean, I always sort of say to clients, you know, it's going to take them at least 6 to 8 hours to do your design, because it's not a modular system. It's all done by hand. And they go, oh, I didn't realize. So when you come in and you want all these little changes, some can be done, but if they're quite significant, they take time. So there's a lot of conversation, and I agree that there can be a lot lost during those conversations. So because people change their mind. So what we have every now and again is somebody saying, yeah, but do you remember when we spoke about that? And they said, yeah, but we dismissed it because you wanted this. No, I didn't. No, you did, but it's fine if you want to change it, if we're able to at that point. So we'll get that. Or I think we had quite a while ago somebody saying, I don't think I've got the right worktop colour. And you go, okay, shall we see what it says on your contract? Okay, so on the contract it says that, but I don't recall it. Do you remember me sending it to you on an email, you know, an image of the slab? And then they go, oh yeah, but it doesn't look like that in my kitchen. And it's like, does it not? Oh God, does that mean the supplier's got it wrong? Right, let us check. So we go back and say, no, it's exactly what you have got, is it? And they go, oh, I really don't think it is. And then they realise themselves, because we get them to sign the photograph off and say, yeah, are you happy with that? You know, yeah, sign here, please. So we might have a little bit of that, or they might turn around and say, I hate my handles. And it's like, well, that's an easy one, but you'll have to buy some new ones. Can you not just send those ones through?
Versus reality, though, isn't it? That's perception versus reality, like of what you've got in your head. And I know you have the like 3D visual and all that, but what you just have in your head, and then when it comes to life, doesn't always. Pan.
In all fairness, it's never usually on the design. In fairness, because the designers are so good that they make sure that they're fully briefed on it, and because we can do sort of 360 versions of the perspective and renders, you don't really get that. And they're so good that these renders do look pretty much exactly the same as what they actually get. So on that side, we're pretty sure of what we're delivering, you know, to the client, and we give them really big A3 images for them to take away. And so we spend a lot of time. So you're talking about a 3-month process with the client, you know, and if you get it that wrong, you seriously have not been listening, or the customer is really devoid of understanding what they've got, you know. So that element doesn't really happen. It is always usually the fine, and it's the little things, it's all the details that people are not familiar with, you know, maybe internals, because it's very hard to show every single internal as to what that's going to look like. But in the main, it's never usually that's the issue. It's usually a missing item, a damaged item. It could be that what's behind when the customers had their old kitchen taken out, there's a whole load of pipe work that nobody was expecting because you can't see it, and there needs a little bit more work being done within the carcasses themselves, you know, to make them fit. Or it could be that a wall's running out that much that even with all the measuring in the world, you're not going to see that on the back wall because you've got units up, you know, and you'll not see that, and that you need an extra end panel, or you need to actually bring it off the wall a little bit more. But that usually doesn't affect the client too much, to be fair. So it is usually small things, not the big things you'd expect.
What's the biggest mistake you've ever had? One.
The mistake we've ever had is that there's 2 ways of looking at this. There's the way that I dealt with it, and it's the way that the customer interpreted it. So we have a company that we use called Specfa, which is a very high-end wood company who make breakfast bars, tables, chairs, worktops, and backsplashes. Now, this particular client had an immense breakfast bar added to their quartz worktop, and it had two or four legs, can't quite remember now. And the customer had asked that their stools fit underneath, which they did. The customer then came back and said, sorry, this worktop, by the way, this worktop comes from Sweden. Okay, it gets imported and it's made to measure, obviously. And the stools did fit under, but apparently the stools didn't fit under enough to allow for, shall we say, a certain body size. Customer was very unhappy. So that was an exceptionally expensive, in their eyes, mistake. My eyes is that we can't take into account body size factors, but they did get replaced.
It's difficult. It really is difficult. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? When you run your own business and it's not a national business, it's not a, it's not a global business, etc., then people tend to like the more artisanal business, the independent business, because people will listen more, they will take more time, they will put things right if things are wrong, and with less argument, and it's all of that's better. But at the same time, having run local businesses, people take the P a bit more as well when it's when it's an independent business. And you wonder whether that gulf will actually continue to widen as well with things like AI, because I mean, it's like entirely possible now to very easily say, right, I'm going to record this conversation and I will present you with the transcript of this conversation.
Yeah.
And you can sign it right there just after we've had it. It would be, if you look at some of the stuff that Amazon are doing with their shops and in universities and things like that, with sort of recognition of even like what's on people's faces and what they've touched, you can actually see if people are stealing things, you can see if people are happy about certain things or not happy about certain things, and you can get so much data, AI data now, that you could feed back into that kind of customer journey. But wonder whether that then takes even more away from that kind of trust element, right? Because the more you put it in the hands of a process and computers, you're actually almost saying, I don't trust you. So, and that trust then doesn't work both ways, does it?
No, I think it's interesting, AI. I do. I think there are elements it's going to really work for. We did hear about with Julia, actually, my colleague. She said that she had been talking, I think, with some of her colleagues in the industry about that AI can now design a kitchen. And she said, potentially that's my job gone, isn't it? But she gave it a go and she used one of these AI, and she said it turned out absolutely horrendous because it's not quite there yet. Will it happen? Probably. However, there are companies out there where you can actually order your kitchen online yourself and you can design it yourself. And it will get, to a degree, checked by somebody behind the scenes. However, we've spoken to a couple of people that went and looked at that, because in doing that, it's cheaper. And there's always going to be somebody cheaper. There's always going to be somebody cheaper than yourself. And it's how you value that and the service that you provide. Now, those people that have come back to us and said, we did try it and it was interesting, but what they felt is all the onus was on them, and they didn't know if they were fully right. They were quite okay with their sizes, but actually they weren't actually too sure on all the finer details. So like, how many hanging brackets do you need, end panels, filler panels, and how does it work for a corner unit? Had they ordered it correctly? Had they sized it correctly? Had they actually got the right handing? And although some of those things seem quite straightforward, and if they've got somebody checking it, the problem is the person checking it doesn't know what your actual space looks like and hasn't been there and can't forewarn you about maybe some things that would be stand out to us, when we go there. So when I spoke about doing the first measure and then doing a pre-fit survey and things like that, you haven't essentially got that, and you can't look out for it. So I think it's a really good option. And I think for people that are builders or people that are really good DIYers and that have fitted kitchens before and have got a really good understanding, then it's great. But for a lot of people who haven't got that experience, to then suddenly go on to these platforms, it's actually quite daunting, because the lure is it's cheaper. But in essence, it's all on you. And if you really get it wrong, and also when you get somebody to come and fit it for you, if you're not fitting it yourself, or even if you are fitting it yourself, if it doesn't fit, where or there's something missing that you've not ordered, how do you know what it is, and how do you get over that? You know, so it's a case of, all right, I need this replacement because it's damaged. What's the code? What's it called? And where's it going? And, you know, have I got the right size? You know, that's a big undertaking. Whereas if that happens to us, whether you're supply only or it's a supply and fitted job, we'll be at the other end of the phone to say, okay, no problem, we'll get that reordered for you, you know, or not a problem. We can go to site pretty quick and say, right, okay, that's the problem. That's what's happening now. This is what you're going to need, you know. And would they get over it? Yes. Would it be correct? Don't know. Not too sure about that. So I think with AI, there's a place, and I think it will definitely assist us. But also people work on trust. And if you haven't got that person that you can ring up and they've said, I'm going to do that for you, and you can trust me to get that done, don't worry, don't panic. You know, I understand how you're feeling at the minute. You know, you've got somebody robotic saying that to you. It's not quite the same, you know. However they look like us, you know, there's something a little bit off, because there always will be. And I think it's a bit like us, all our banks going off the high street. You're missing that personal approach of, you know, when you went in and somebody said, oh, hello, Mrs. Smith, how are you today? How did you get on? You know, how's your granddaughter, or whatever it may be? You're missing that. And our clients love that. Our clients will pop their heads in and say, hi, girls, how are you doing? You know, still love my kitchen. I've told such and such about you because I love it. You know, those little nuances that make us different to a high street is because we're personable, because we actually care. And I'm not saying that those on the high street don't care. I'm saying that you are very much a transactional client rather than a client that's cared about and that we follow up with.
It's that emotional connection though, isn't it? You can't put a price on that. And
No,
as much as AI or any technology is great, you just can't beat that emotional connection with someone. I think that's, you know, I went out to a client the other day. They've been using recruitment agency for 5 years, and I'm the first person that ever went to their establishment to see their culture, to understand what they're doing, to see what it is. And they've been trying to fill this role for ages, not getting the right candidate. And we've got someone starting on Tuesday after the bank holiday. So that's all the difference, is getting that understanding of what, you know. And they even said, oh, have you got any feedback for me? So, you know, you remember I wrote that prepare model about like getting people prepared for interviews. I was like, well, you know, the lady in reception, he said, Jelly said, make sure she knows the girl's name when she comes and knows that the appointment's coming and stuff. And when I said to the candidate, I said, to the receptionist know you? And they went, yeah. I was like, oh, that was nice that they listened, you know, and that made her feel special, because it's just them little attention to detail things that make someone feel more valued. And then she felt comfortable to have a little conversation while she was waiting for the interviewer, you know. So they're the stuff that you can't buy. You know,
and it's all in the detail. It's all in that detail. I mean, where I can with when Julia has her clients in, or any of the designers have their clients in, I'll always go out of my way to say, oh, hello, you know, Mrs. Connor or Mr. Connor, you know, I'm just having a little chat. Like today, one of Julia's clients came in and I said, oh my God, I love your outfit. She went, oh God, don't. She said, I've had the plaster and that's with something on. She said, oh, I look a mess. I said, you don't, you're rocking that. You look great. She said, oh, thank you. You know, and she actually did. I wasn't just blowing smoke. You know, I was actually genuinely, I loved her jumpsuit that she was wearing. It looked great. And it's little things like that. And if the kids come in, there was a child and the parents were really struggling because it was a little toddler. And I said, can I take her? And I said, and I'll just take her around. She said, oh, do you mind? No, not at all. So I don't know this little baby, but they trusted me enough to take the baby on my hip and show the fish in the fish tank and take her around and see all the little bits in the showroom. And it enabled them to be able to finalise with Julia. And I'm sure Julia found that super helpful as well. So it's those sort of things that you're never going to beat, because it's very personal.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It makes all the difference. Makes all the difference. One day I'll get my kitchen done. but before we get there, I'm still waiting for my father-in-law to come and dig out down the side of the house, because otherwise the one whole wall in the kitchen is too damp, and I wouldn't want to spend the money and put something decent in there until all of that work is done. Do you find that when, especially like older properties and whatever, if you go to do stuff, do you actually end up having to say, oh, looks like you're going to need to do some building work here first before we can even touch this? And then do you signpost people on to builders and whatever that you trust?
Yeah, so basically we are a design and supply service, so we actually don't do the installation, but we'll work alongside those contractors that can do that work. Diane knows because she's referred me a couple of people, which is great, and we'll only deal with people that have been recommended. So a lot of those people that are recommended are already our clients, and so we put them on a preferred list. Purely, we know they do a good job and they've done a good job for our clients, and they're super happy. So when we go out there, there might be an indication from Julia, if it's obvious, and it's not always obvious, if there is damp, because obviously the biggest concern is a wood-based product. You know, what's it going to do? It's going to burst as soon as it hits any moisture over a period of time. So it's within our interests to alert the customer to that. In the main, it will probably be the contractor who goes out to look at the property to quote for the installation or whatever building works are going on, and they'll be the one to alert it to the customer because they've got far more experience than we have. Again, it goes back to those skilled people that you work alongside to collaborate with for your clients. And if those situations do occur, which they have done in these older properties, it doesn't come as a massive shock to those clients. But we do need to be really honest with them and say, you've got so much moisture going on in this property. As soon as we put this product in, it's not going to withstand the guarantee period. And it's within our interest, because we do not want that for the client. We do not want to lose that trust with our client. We don't want them to think that we've just sidewiped them really and said, yeah, we'll just put anything in because we get the money. You know, at the end of the day, we want to have continued relationship with that client and get recommendations. What do you think is going to happen as soon as that product? They're going to blame us, you know, because we're...
Do you know, on that note then, Maria, would a structural engineer be useful for you to have as an introduction then?
I think it would be if there was something substantial that was going on that was outside of the contractor's realm. So I think more so for the contractors rather than the client, because the client won't always know if they need that, but the contractor will. So on that basis, yes.
Just on that note though, so I know from our weekly group, the structural engineer, the laws have changed that it's the responsibility of the owner, the house owner, to have all that put in place. So it's maybe, especially when you're doing it where it's an extension and they're putting the kitchen in there, if you're just replacing like for like, you know, but when on the bigger jobs, it might be just worthwhile at the beginning saying, you know, if you as a structural engineer come in and look at this, because when they try and sell the house, if stuff is wrong, they will have to right the wrong before the house can be sold on.
I think it would definitely be worthwhile, because from our point of view, we wouldn't know if that was required. I think if I was to advise the installers or the contractors and say, look, I've been given this really good contact, so that if you do come up against this, this would be somebody that's recommended, tried and tested. Absolutely, that'd be ideal.
Because all the laws are changing around, like domestic like rules and regulations, aren't they?
I mean, that would be good to just give us information to the teams, because, you know, some keep their ears to the ground, some don't. So that'd probably be really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
And going back to, you know, your 360, I met somebody the other day where they've got like a virtual VR. So it's more for estate agents. So you could go, rather than having to go to view the property, you just put that on and see the property. That maybe could be useful, you know, like as a different technology. So that like you can stand in the kitchen and maybe like feel like you're working in it or something, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really get asked for it, but I know that certain companies use it. However, on when we do the renders, the perspectives, there is an option at the bottom for the client to be able to look at it in 3D. So as in a VR, and it's got a little VR headset on it. So and you can, the actual 360 is a 360, but if they've got a VR headset themselves, which I've got one, so a number of people have, they can actually put that on and through their phone, they can actually visualize themselves doing that. So that is already there. It's been there for a while. But as far as doing it in the showroom, bizarrely, doesn't really, we don't get a call for it until nobody's ever asked us for it, or questioned it. I think for high streets, it's definitely something that works. But for studios as yet, I don't think it's really become a thing yet for us.
Could be a trip hazard.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, my word! You got to be careful with people wearing VR and wandering around.
Well, they usually have designated rooms, and in studios, they're invariably a lot smaller than, obviously the big high street stores. So I know that there are certain high street retailers that have a designated room that actually have sort of blank units and things, or just a blank room entirely, and that's great because they're not going to hurt themselves, because there is that element. But the studios invariably don't want to give up any little bit of space we've got. We'd rather have a display in there rather than a vacant room that might get used maybe